thought the house I built with my own hands was my sanctuary, proof that I had survived everything they put me through. I was wrong. One Sunday dinner changed everything. My parents didn't ask for help. They demanded my home, my reputation, my future, and threatened to destroy me if I refused. What they didn't know was that this time, I wouldn't fold, and when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just save me, it burned their lies to the ground. I ran my hand over the cool quartz countertop of my kitchen island, letting my fingertips linger on the smooth surface as if touching something real could anchor me in the present. It was exactly 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary moment most people forget as soon as it passes. But for me, it mattered. The house was silent. Not an empty silence. Not the kind that echoes and reminds you of what's missing, but a full silence. A earned silence. To some people, quiet feels lonely. To me, it sounded like victory. My name is Morgan. I'm 34 years old, and for the last decade I clawed my way up from being a receptionist with a bad haircut and a borrowed blazer to one of the top producing real estate agents in the greater Boston area. Nobody handed me a shortcut. Nobody cleared a path. Every rung I climbed, I grabbed with bleeding fingers. This house, a Victorian painted lady with wraparound porches and original stained glass, wasn't just where I lived. It was evidence. It was proof that I existed, that I mattered, that I could build something permanent without permission or approval. Worth is earned, Morgan, not given. My mentor Genevieve used to say that to me when I was 22. Broke, desperate, and pretending not to notice how often people looked past me. She was the broker who took a chance on me when no one else would. She taught me how to read floor plans, how to negotiate closing costs, how to look a client in the eye and not flinch, and most importantly, how to value myself when the world treated me like discount inventory. I poured myself a glass of Chardonnay and walked into the living room as the late afternoon sun filtered through the bay windows, painting long golden shadows across the hardwood floors. I had refinished those floors myself, weekends on my knees, scraping layers of ugly beige paint to uncover the craftsmanship underneath. Every blister, every ache, every ruined manicure was a receipt. This house remembered my effort even when people never did. But there was a secret built into the bones of the place, one I hadn't admitted to anyone, not even my therapist. When I renovated the ground floor, I spent an extra $20,000 converting the old library into a fully accessible guest suite. Walk-in shower, wide doorways, separate thermostat. I told my friends it was for resale value. I told myself it was smart planning, but deep down, in the part of my mind that still carried the voice of a scared little girl, I knew the truth. I built it for them, for my parents, Conrad and Lydia. I carried this quiet fantasy that one day they would get old and need me. And when they stood in that room, surrounded by what I had built, they would finally say the words I had waited my whole life to hear. "We're proud of you, Morgan. You did good." It was embarrassing how much that fantasy still lived in me. A grown woman, still trying to buy love from people who had already spent it all on someone else. That someone was my brother Spencer. Growing up, the imbalance in our house wasn't subtle or accidental. Spencer was the sun. Everything revolved around him. I was background noise. When Spencer turned 16, my father drove a brand new cherry red Mustang into the driveway with a bow on it. I watched from the window, stomach sinking, already knowing what it meant. 2 years later, on my 16th birthday, I got a bus pass and a lecture about independence. "We want you to be strong," Lydia said sweetly. "Spencer needs the car. You're smart. You'll figure it out." Spencer's college tuition was paid in full. His rent, his spending money, his mistakes were reframed as potential. I worked 3 jobs just to stay afloat: barista at dawn, library clerk in the afternoon, tutor at night. And still, They spoke about him like he was destined for greatness, and me like I was an inconvenience that somehow hadn't gone away. And yet here I was, standing in $1 million home I bought myself. And Spencer? Last I heard, he was dodging credit card collectors and asking Mom for gas money. I took a sip of wine and let the bitterness fade. I thought I was safe here. I thought this house was a fortress. I was wrong. A fortress means nothing if you open the gates to people who see it as something to take. The illusion of safety shattered 3 days later on a Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. Sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet like glass breaking. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first instinct was irritation. My second was caution. I checked the security camera feed on my phone, already feeling that familiar tightening in my chest. And there they were, Spencer and his wife Sierra standing on my front porch like they owned it. Spencer had gained weight since the last time I'd seen him. His polo shirt stretched tight across his stomach, Starbucks cup in hand like a prop in a life he was still pretending to lead. Sierra was already performing. Arm extended, phone angled high, lips pursed into that practiced influencer smile as she filmed herself in front of my house. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, hoping irrationally they might leave if I didn't answer. They didn't. I opened the door and braced myself. "Morgan, little sis," Spencer boomed, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. His cologne heavy and synthetic, like ambition gone sour. He stepped into my foyer and let out a low whistle, eyes sweeping the space not with admiration but with calculation. "Wow," he said. "Didn't know you were doing this well." Sierra followed, finally lowering her phone long enough to scan me head to toe before turning back to the camera. "Guys, look at this place," she said brightly. "It's giving Victorian haunted mansion, but like, expensive." I closed the door behind them and locked it out of habit, though I wasn't sure what I was trying to protect. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "Oh, relax," Sierra said, wandering toward the living room like she was on a guided tour. "We just wanted to see the house. Your entryway is literally bigger than our apartment. Must be lonely living in a place this big all by yourself." I didn't answer that. Spencer had already dropped onto my leather armchair, testing the cushions like he was evaluating inventory. "Nice setup, Morgs. Business must be booming." "It's steady," I said. "So why are you really here?" Spencer laughed, loud and hollow. "Can't a brother check in on his sister?" "But yeah, things are a little tight. Our landlord's being a psycho. Missed a couple payments, and now he's threatening eviction. Can you believe that?" I could believe it perfectly. Spencer had a talent for lighting money on fire and blaming the ashes. Microbrewery that failed because he drank the product. Drop shipping sunglasses that never shipped. A luxury gym that never opened. Every failure reframed as bad timing or other people's incompetence. "That's rough," I said. "What are you planning to do?" Sierra drifted into the dining room, fingers trailing across the table. I'd restored myself. "Babe," she said to Spencer, "this room would be perfect for a nursery. The light is amazing." My stomach dropped. Spencer stood and wrapped an arm around her waist, grinning. "We're thinking about starting a family. Carrying on the dynasty." Dynasty. The word almost made me laugh out loud. "You're getting evicted," I said. "It's temporary," Spencer snapped, the charm slipping for a second. "Cash flow issue. Dad's helping us restructure some things." "What does that mean?" I asked, watching him carefully. "It means family looks out for family," he said smoothly, that shark smile back in place. "Anyway, this house is kind of huge for one person. Don't you think it's a little selfish to hog all this space?" "It's not selfish," I said. "It's mine." They left soon after, all smiles and vague promises, as I watched them walk down the driveway. Sierra leaned into Spencer and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Don't worry, babe. Dad said she won't have a choice." The lock clicked behind them, but the cold didn't leave my chest. I knew my father. Conrad didn't make idle threats. He didn't suggest. He orchestrated. And if he was involved, this wasn't about helping Spencer. It was about taking something from me. The call came 2 days later on Thursday afternoon while I was sitting at my desk reviewing comps for a downtown condo listing. The kind of deal that required precision and focus. The kind of deal my livelihood depended on. My phone buzzed once, then again. I glanced down and felt my stomach tighten instantly. Conrad. His contact photo was old, from a decade ago. Him in a suit, with that same rigid expression he used when he wanted to remind you who held power. I let it ring. I told myself I was busy. I told myself I was an adult who didn't have to answer on command anymore. The voicemail notification popped up almost immediately, followed by a text that might as well have been stamped in red ink. Sunday dinner, 6 p.m. Do not be late. We need a family strategy meeting. Attendance is mandatory. Mandatory. Like I was an employee who had missed a quota. My hands started shaking before I could stop them. It was humiliating how fast my body reacted. How easily 34 years of independence collapsed under one sentence from that man. I was successful. I owned my business. I paid my own bills. And still, one message from Conrad turned me into a scared teenager waiting to be judged. I finished the call with my client on autopilot and spent the rest of the day pretending I wasn't unraveling. Sunday came too quickly. I drove to my childhood home just before 6. The same brick colonial with the manicured lawn and symmetrical windows. Everything perfect on the outside like it always had been. The house looked exactly the same, frozen in time, like the years hadn't touched it even though they had worn me thin. When I walked in, the smell of meatloaf hit me hard. My chest tightened. My mother knew I hated meatloaf. She always made it anyway. Spencer's favorite. "You're 4 minutes late," Conrad said from the head of the dining table without looking up. He was wearing a blazer and tie inside his own house. Like this was a board meeting instead of a family dinner. Traffic was bad. "Dad?" I said quietly. "Hi, Mom." Lydia smiled at me with that tight, polite smile she used when she wanted to appear gracious without actually being kind. Spencer and Sierra were already seated across from me. Both of them, wearing expressions that made my skin crawl. Sierra rested her hand on her stomach dramatically, though she didn't look pregnant, just performative. "Let's eat," Conrad said. Dinner was unbearable. The clink of silverware on china felt louder than conversation. No one spoke. I could feel them watching me, measuring me, waiting. Finally, Conrad set his fork down deliberately and wiped his mouth. "Morgan, thank you for joining us," he began in that calm, professional tone he used when delivering ultimatums. "We've convened this meeting to discuss asset reallocation for the good of the family legacy." I set my fork down. "Asset reallocation? Dad? We're not a corporation." Lydia chimed in smoothly. "Families are units, Morgan, and units support weaker members during periods of transition." Conrad nodded approvingly. Spencer and Sierra are entering a new phase of life. They're trying to start a family. They need stability. They need the proper environment to raise my grandchildren. I swallowed. "Okay, so you're helping them find a place, or co-signing a loan?" "No," Conrad said, looking directly at me. "Spencer cannot qualify for a mortgage right now due to market volatility affecting his ventures. Rentals are throwing money away. We need a permanent solution." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "We've decided your house on Elm Street is the most suitable environment." The room tilted. "My house? What do you mean, my house?" "It has the space," Sierra said quickly. 4 bedrooms, a yard, great light. Perfect for a baby." "It may be perfect," I said slowly, "but it's my house." "You live there alone," Conrad replied. "It's a waste of resources. A single woman doesn't need 4 bedrooms. Spencer and Sierra have a greater need." My heart started pounding. What exactly are you saying? Conrad folded his hands. We want you to transfer the deed of your house to Spencer. The words landed like a physical blow. I stared at him, waiting for laughter, for some sign this was a sick joke. None came. In exchange, Spencer will transfer his apartment lease to you. It's a luxury building, more appropriate for your stage of life. He's being evicted, I shouted, standing up. He doesn't have a lease. You want me to give him my house for nothing? Sit down, Morgan, Conrad barked. No, I bought that house. I paid the down payment. I renovated it myself. You didn't give me anything. Conrad smiled, cold and terrifying, and reached under the table. He pulled out a black leather notebook. I recognized it instantly. The book he used to keep records in when we were kids. We anticipated you might get emotional, he said, opening it. Let's review the investments we made in you. He adjusted his glasses. Orthodontic work, $4,000. Contribution toward your first car, $5,000. Freshman textbooks and dorm supplies. Health insurance coverage. He read the list like a ledger. I calculated compound interest using a standard venture capital return. You owe the family trust approximately $150,000. I felt sick. You're charging me for braces. That's insane. You're legally obligated to care for your children. Lydia leaned forward. We went above and beyond. Now it's time to pay dividends. This isn't real, I said, backing away. Those weren't loans. It was implied, Conrad said quietly. You succeeded because we invested. Now Spencer needs this house. You owe him. I owe him nothing, I yelled. He got everything. New cars, free college. I worked for everything. Spencer slammed his hand on the table. I'm the eldest son. I carry the name. You're just selfish. Enough, Conrad snapped, closing the book. You will sign the transfer papers by the 30th, and if I don't, then we sue you. Breach of implied contract, elder financial abuse, fraud. Imagine what that does to your license, Morgan. I couldn't breathe. He knew exactly where to hit. I grabbed my purse and ran. I ran out the door, shaking so badly I could barely drive. In the mirror, I saw my father watching me leave like he had just won, and for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. The next 24 hours felt unreal, like I was moving through water while the world sped past me on land. I barely slept that night. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by old folders, tax returns, bank statements, renovation receipts, anything that felt like proof that reality still existed. My father's voice replayed in my head over and over. Implied contract, venture capital rate, elder abuse. It was horrifying how effective it was. That's the insidious thing about lifelong manipulation. Even when logic tells you something is impossible, the conditioning makes you doubt yourself anyway. At 3 a.m, I found myself Googling phrases I never thought I would type. Implied contract parental support lawsuit. Massachusetts. Can parents sue adult child for childhood expenses? Elder financial abuse definition real estate agent. Each search result told the same story. This was nonsense. Legal nonsense. But fear doesn't care about facts. Fear cares about consequences. And Conrad knew exactly which consequence would terrify me the most. My reputation. In real estate, trust is oxygen. A single whisper can kill a deal. A lawsuit tied to fraud or elder abuse wouldn't just hurt me emotionally. It would annihilate my business. That was the leverage. That was the real threat. By morning, my hands were shaking so badly I spilled coffee all over the counter. I hadn't cried yet. I was too wired for that. Instead, my brain kept spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Headlines, gossip, clients quietly choosing another agent, Genevieve calling me into her office with disappointment in her eyes. Everything I built evaporating because my father decided my success belonged to my brother. Around 9 a.m., I finally did the one thing Conrad never expected me to do. I asked for help. I called Harper, my best friend since college. We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our offices. The moment she saw me, she didn't ask questions. She ordered me a double espresso and a croissant and slid them across the table like emergency rations. When I finally spoke, the words came out in a rush. The dinner, the notebook. Harper stared at me for a long second, then burst out laughing so loudly the barista looked over. "Morgan," she said, lowering her voice, "that is absolutely unhinged. Your father is charging you for braces." "Braces?" He sounded so confident, I whispered. "He used legal terms. He said he has a lawyer." "He's a narcissist with a thesaurus," Harper snapped. "You need a real lawyer, a shark, someone who eats men like your father for breakfast." She pulled out her phone and sent me a number. "His name is Brooks. He handled my cousin's divorce when her ex tried to steal her business. He's expensive. He's brutal. He's perfect." I called immediately, right there at the table. When I said the words, "imminent lawsuit involving real estate deed transfer," the receptionist's tone changed. 2 p.m. That same day, Brooks's office looked exactly like what you'd expect a man like that to inhabit. Dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. Everything about the space radiated power and permanence. Brooks himself was in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every manipulation known to man. I sat across from him, clutching my folder like a life raft. My voice shook as I explained everything: the notebook, the alleged debt, the threat to sue me for elder abuse. I slid the photo of the black book across the desk along with my mortgage paperwork. Brooks put on his glasses and studied it in silence. My stomach dropped. Then his shoulders started to shake. A sound escaped his throat that I didn't recognize at first. Laughter. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. He pulled off his glasses and laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. "Orthodontics," he said between breaths. "Venture capital. That's a new one. Is this funny?" I asked weakly. "Miss Morgan," he said, finally composing himself. "In 40 years of practice, I have seen some creative nonsense. This is art. Let me be clear. There is no implied contract for raising a child. Parents are legally required to provide medical care, food, shelter. They cannot retroactively bill you for it, the car, the tuition, gifts unless documented as loans. Statute of limitations expired years ago." He leaned forward. "They have zero case. Less than zero. If they file this, I will have it dismissed so fast, it'll make your father's head spin. And then I will countersue them for harassment and attempted extortion." My chest loosened for the first time since Sunday. "So I'm safe." "You're more than safe," Brooks said. "You're going on offense." He drafted a cease and desist letter that afternoon. It was ruthless. Any further attempts to coerce property transfer would result in legal action. Any public defamation would be met with immediate response. He looked at me before sending it. "Are you ready for what comes next?" I thought about my father's smile, about Spencer measuring my living room for a nursery, about being told I was selfish for owning what I earned. "Send it," I said, when the letter arrived at my parents' house 2 days later. My phone exploded. Calls, texts, voicemails. I didn't answer a single one. Mom crying, Spencer raging, extended family piling on with Bible verses and guilt. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Brooks laughing. That laughter grounded me. It reminded me that the fear was manufactured, and once fear loses its credibility, it loses its power. The silence after the letter felt heavier than the threats that came before it, like the moment after thunder when you realize the storm isn't finished yet, it's just repositioning itself. I went back to work because routine was the only thing keeping me upright. Showing houses, writing offers, smiling through conversations that felt unreal while my phone vibrated nonstop in my bag. I didn't read the messages anymore. I only counted them. Missed calls from my mother stacking into the double digits. Texts from Spencer swinging wildly between rage and desperation. Voicemails from aunts and cousins telling me I was tearing the family apart, reminding me who raised me, quoting scripture like it was a legal statute. It was surreal how fast the narrative flipped. 1 week earlier, I was the selfish daughter hoarding space. Now, I was the villain threatening the family legacy. That's how I knew the letter had landed exactly where it needed to. People don't panic when they're right. They panic when control slips out of reach. Sierra escalated first. She posted a video online. Eyes glossy, voice trembling, talking about toxic relatives who hoard wealth and abandoned family during hard times. Never saying my name, but making it obvious enough that anyone who knew us could fill in the blanks. The video spread just far enough to sting. A few thousand views. Comments split between sympathy and skepticism. I watched it once, felt my hands shake, then closed the app and handed my phone to Harper like it was something sharp. "Don't spiral," she said. "This is noise. Noise is all they have left." I tried to believe her. On Friday afternoon, Genevieve called me into her office. My stomach dropped the second I saw her name pop up on my screen. This was it, I thought. Damage control. Instead, she turned her laptop around to show me the paused video. "I assume this is about your parents trying to steal your house," she said flatly. I blinked. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "It won't affect my work, Morgan," she said sharply. "I've known your father for 20 years. He's a bully who mistakes volume for authority. You stand your ground. If anyone asks, I'll tell them exactly who earned their success in that family. You have my full support." The relief hit so hard I had to grip the chair. That was the difference, I realized, between blood and family. Blood demands sacrifice. Family offers protection. 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo where nothing happened, and everything happened at the same time. My parents didn't file a lawsuit. They couldn't. Instead, they tightened the pressure socially, whispering to anyone who would listen, painting themselves as victims of a greedy daughter corrupted by money. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Grandpa Silas's 85th birthday. Formal dinner at the country club. The patriarch. The one man, Conrad feared. I stared at the envelope for a long time before deciding to go. If I didn't, they would control the story. They would poison the well before I ever opened my mouth. I needed the truth in the room. I chose my armor carefully, a tailored red dress that made me stand taller, heels I could walk fast in if I had to. When I entered the ballroom, the energy shifted instantly. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. My mother shot me a look that could have curdled milk. Conrad intercepted me near the hallway. Eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. "You have some nerve showing your face," he hissed, backing me toward the wall. "You humiliated us with that letter." "I protected myself," I said calmly. "Back away." He grabbed my arm. "You fix this," he snarled. "You tear up that letter and sign the deed, or I swear I will cut you out of the will and make sure Silas knows exactly what kind of traitor you are." "Get your hand off her, Richard." The voice cut through the room like steel. Grandpa Silas stood behind him, cane in hand, eyes sharp. Conrad froze. I was shaking, but Silas looked at me and smiled softly. "You look strong, Morgan. That red suits you. Come, it's time for the toast." He led me into the main hall, where Spencer and Sierra sat stiffly at the head table. Silas took the microphone and the room quieted instantly. "My son has been talking a lot about asset reallocation," Silas began. Gesturing to Conrad, who had gone pale, he told me he needed access to my accounts, said the family needed liquidity. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "This morning, my investigator gave me a report," Silas continued, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "It appears Richard and Spencer invested family funds into a cryptocurrency scheme called Mooncoin. A scam." A Ponzi. They lost everything. Gasps filled the room. My retirement accounts, their accounts, gone. And then Silas turned, eyes locking on Conrad, and I learned they've been trying to steal my granddaughter's home, to cover their mess. Not to live in, to sell. The room erupted. Conrad stammered. Spencer put his head in his hands. Sierra screamed that she'd been lied to. Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Richard, you are a thief. Spencer, you are a fool. Security escorted them out as Silas instructed someone to call the police. I stood there, stunned. The truth crashing down all at once. It was never about babies or family. It was about cash, about desperation, about greed. The fallout was swift. Charges filed. Assets seized. My childhood home foreclosed. Spencer arrested on fraud charges. Sierra filed for divorce within days. And through it all, my house remained untouched. My name clean. The victory felt heavy, not sweet. I mourned the parents I wished I had, not the ones I lost. 6 months later, I hosted Thanksgiving for the first time. My house filled with warmth and laughter. Grandpa Silas sat at the head of the table, now living in the guest suite I had once built for my parents. The irony didn't escape me. Harper poured wine. Genevieve teased me about the centerpiece. Brooks brought cranberry sauce like it was a peace offering. When my phone buzzed with a message from a blocked number asking for help, I looked around the room, felt the safety, the love, the truth. I deleted the message. I raised my glass to family, and for the first time in my life, it tasted like freedom. In the weeks after that Thanksgiving, something inside me finally slowed down, like a machine that had been running too hot for too long and was now allowed to cool. The adrenaline faded first, then the constant scanning for danger, then the reflexive guilt that had lived in my chest for as long as I could remember. I didn't wake up one morning feeling healed or triumphant. I woke up feeling neutral, and that neutrality was unfamiliar enough to scare me. For most of my life, every interaction with my family had carried an invisible tax. I paid it in anxiety, in over-explaining, in anticipating their reactions before they even spoke. When that stopped, the silence it left behind felt strange, almost hollow, like stepping off a moving walkway and having to relearn how to walk at your own pace. I went back to work fully, not as a distraction but as a grounding force. Showings felt calmer. Negotiations felt cleaner. I noticed I wasn't second-guessing myself as much. Decisions that once took hours of internal debate now took minutes, not because I cared less, but because I trusted myself more. That trust hadn't come from winning. It came from surviving without collapsing, from standing my ground and watching the world not end. The realization crept in slowly that my parents never misunderstood me. They understood me perfectly well. They just didn't like what understanding implied. Accepting my independence would have meant accepting their favoritism, their manipulation, their failures. It was easier for them to rewrite me as selfish than to rewrite themselves as wrong. Once I saw that, something fundamental shifted. I stopped personalizing their cruelty. I stopped asking what I could have done differently. I stopped wondering how to make them see me. You can't make people see what they benefit from ignoring. That truth hurt, but it also freed me. I began to notice how much of my ambition had been driven by a quiet need to be undeniable, to become so successful they would have no choice but to respect me. That engine had gotten me far, but it had also tethered my worth to their approval in ways I hadn't acknowledged. Letting go of that motivation felt like cutting a cord I didn't know I was still attached to. For a brief moment, I worried it would make me complacent. It didn't. It made me precise. I stopped chasing deals that only looked impressive on paper. I stopped overcommitting to people who drained me. I stopped saying yes just to avoid discomfort. My calendar cleared. My energy sharpened. I slept better than I had in years. I also had to grieve something quietly and honestly. Not the parents I had, but the parents I kept hoping they might become, the version of them who would protect instead of exploit, who would choose relationship over control. Letting go of that imagined future was painful, but it was also the last negotiation I had to end. Once it was over, I stopped replaying conversations in my head. I stopped rehearsing explanations I would never get to give. I stopped living as if closure was something they could grant me. Closure came when I stopped waiting. I noticed the change in small moments. I no longer flinched when my phone rang. I no longer felt the urge to justify my choices to people who hadn't earned an explanation. When discomfort surfaced, I treated it as information instead of something to suppress. That was new. Growing up, discomfort had meant danger. Now it meant a boundary was being tested. Honoring that instinct made my life quieter, not smaller, quieter, in a way that felt stable. One evening, walking alone through my neighborhood, I caught my reflection in a darkened window and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not physically, but in her posture. She wasn't braced. She wasn't shrinking. She looked settled, like someone who knew she belonged exactly where she was. That was when I understood the cycle had finally broken. Not because my parents faced consequences, not because justice was served publicly, but because their voices no longer narrated my life. The power they once held over me didn't get taken away in a dramatic moment. It dissolved the day I stopped handing it back. If you're listening to this and waiting for the people who hurt you to admit what they did, hear me clearly. That moment may never come. And tying your healing to it will keep you tethered longer than necessary. Freedom doesn't come from being validated by people who benefit from denying your experience. It comes from validating yourself so thoroughly that their denial loses relevance. That was the real victory. Not the house, not the courtroom, not the spectacle. The moment I stopped outsourcing my worth to people who had proven they could not be trusted with it. And once you reach that point, everything that comes after is built on solid ground. What followed that realization was not dramatic growth or sudden joy, but a steady reordering of my life that felt almost surgical in its precision. Quiet choices, stacking on top of each other, until everything looked the same on the outside, but functioned completely differently underneath. I stopped rushing through my days, stopped filling silence with noise, stopped confusing busyness with safety. Mornings became slower. I drank my coffee without checking my phone. I walked through my house, noticing things I had rushed past before. The way the light hit the stained glass at different hours, the way the floors creaked in familiar places, the way the guest suite felt calm instead of symbolic. Now that it no longer carried the weight of a fantasy that would never come true, I realized how much of my life had been organized around managing other people's expectations, even when they weren't present. I had been living as if someone was always watching, always evaluating, always ready to withdraw approval. When that invisible audience disappeared, my nervous system didn't know what to do at first. Calm felt suspicious, like something bad must be coming. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it didn't. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing exploded. No punishment arrived. No disaster followed my refusal to comply. That absence became proof that safety could exist without appeasement. That peace didn't require constant vigilance. I noticed the shift most clearly in my work. Negotiations felt cleaner. I didn't over-explain pricing. I didn't soften my boundaries to keep clients comfortable. The right people respected it immediately. The wrong people self-selected out. Both outcomes saved me time. I stopped taking rejection personally. Not every no was an indictment. Not every disappointment meant I had failed. Sometimes it simply meant alignment wasn't there. That understanding reduced friction everywhere. I also started seeing patterns I had ignored before, how often I had been drawn to relationships that mirrored my family dynamic. People who needed managing. People who took more than they gave. People who confused intensity with intimacy. Without that pull, My choices changed. I gravitated toward people who were steady, emotionally available, direct without cruelty. Relationships that once might have felt boring now felt safe. And safety turned out to be fertile ground for depth. Conversations went further. Trust built faster. I stopped explaining my boundaries as if they were requests. I stated them once and watched what people did next. Behavior told me everything I needed to know. Some connections faded quietly, others strengthened. My circle grew smaller but stronger. I had more energy because I wasn't constantly negotiating for space. One afternoon, a junior agent on my team stayed behind after a meeting. Nervous, hesitant, she told me she had turned down a role her parents wanted her to take because it looked impressive but felt wrong. She said watching me choose myself made her realize she was allowed to do the same. I hadn't intended to teach anyone anything. I was just living honestly. But that was the moment I understood how impact really works. Not through speeches or explanations, but through example. Boundaries don't just protect you. They give other people permission to stop performing too. That realization stayed with me. I became more intentional about the environments I created, the tone I set, the way I handled conflict. I refused to recreate dynamics where people felt small or disposable. I knew exactly what that felt like, and I wasn't going to pass it on. There was a moment that confirmed how far I had come. I ran into someone who knew my parents well, someone who had watched me grow up on the margins of rooms. She looked at me and said, I seemed different. Grounded was the word she used. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain. I didn't feel the urge to defend my life choices. Her perception no longer mattered. And that was freedom. Not loud, not defiant, just solid. I stopped measuring success by what impressed others and started measuring it by how often I felt at ease in my own skin. How quickly I recovered from stress. How rarely I doubted my right to say no. Those became my metrics. If you're listening to this and calm feels unfamiliar, if peace feels like something you don't deserve yet, understand this clearly. That feeling is not intuition. It's conditioning, and it fades as you build evidence that safety can be sustained. You don't force that process. You live it, one honest choice at a time, until one day you realize the life you're living now would have felt impossible to the version of you who was just trying to survive. And that isn't luck. It's healing doing its quiet work. By the time that steadiness became familiar, I started noticing something else happening around me. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small, unmistakable ways that told me my internal shift was no longer just internal. People began responding to me differently, not because I demanded respect or announced boundaries, but because I no longer negotiated my worth. Conversations shortened, explanations became unnecessary. When I said no, it landed cleanly without apology. When I said yes, it carried weight. I hadn't changed my tone. I had changed my certainty, and certainty alters how others engage with you. At work, meetings felt calmer, disagreements surfaced without passive aggression. Issues were addressed directly, instead of circling around egos. I realized how often in the past I had absorbed tension for other people, smoothing things over before discomfort could surface. Without that habit, honesty had space to breathe. It didn't make me harsh. It made me clear, and clarity created trust faster than charm ever had. One afternoon, a junior agent lingered after a meeting, shifting her weight like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up more time. She finally told me she had turned down a role her parents pushed her toward because it looked impressive but felt wrong. She said, watching how I moved through decisions made her realize she didn't have to build a life that felt like a performance just to be accepted. I hadn't intended to be an example. I had simply stopped betraying myself. But that was when it hit me, how change actually spreads, not through speeches or confrontation, but through permission. Quiet permission that tells other people another way is possible. That moment stayed with me longer than any closing bonus ever had. the ripple effects didn't stop there. Friends began testing their own limits, saying no where they once said yes out of habit, questioning dynamics they had always assumed were fixed. One admitted she stayed in a relationship where she felt small because she thought love required endurance. Another told me she finally named the way her family compared her to her siblings and decided she was done participating in that story. Not everyone got apologies. Not everyone got understanding. But they got clarity, and clarity changed how they showed up. That's when I understood something deeply uncomfortable and deeply freeing. Choosing yourself doesn't just change your life. It disrupts the justifications other people use to stay stuck. Some people resent you for that. Others learn from it. Both reactions tell you who belongs in your future. There was one moment that crystallized this truth for me. My aunt, the quiet one who always watched from the edges, showed up unannounced at one of my community events. She hovered near the back like she wasn't sure she belonged. When I noticed her and walked over, she hugged me tightly and whispered that she wished she had been brave like me. She told me she had followed every rule, kept the peace, stayed small, and still ended up invisible. Watching me choose myself made her realize it might not be too late to stop disappearing. A month later, she left her marriage quietly and started over without drama or announcements. Just a decision. That was when it truly landed. Boundaries don't just protect you. They give others a map, not instructions. Proof. Of course, not everyone responded with growth. Some people pulled away, uncomfortable with the mirror. My choices held up. Others tested whether access had reopened. Once the chaos settled, it hadn't. I learned that access is not something you owe people simply because they are familiar. It's something you grant based on how they treat you when you stop being convenient. That distinction simplified my life more than any productivity system ever could. My circle grew smaller and stronger. Conversations became more honest. Time felt intentional instead of crowded. I stopped confusing history with obligation, stopped mistaking proximity for intimacy. I invested in environments that felt calm rather than competitive. Relationships that didn't require constant recalibration. Work that aligned with my values instead of feeding old insecurities. And the more I lived that way, the more I realized how much of my earlier drive had been fueled by proving I wasn't who my family said I was. Once that motivation dissolved, what remained was cleaner and more sustainable, ambition without desperation, purpose without pressure. One evening, sitting alone watching the city lights reflect against the windows, I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in weeks. Not with anger, not with longing, just absence, neutral space where pain used to live. That was the ripple no one warns you about, the internal one, the way your nervous system learns it's safe to rest. That love doesn't come with conditions attached. That peace doesn't require performance. And once that lesson settles into your body, you don't just live differently. You lead differently. You choose differently. You allow differently. If you're listening to this and wondering whether choosing yourself will make you selfish, hear this clearly. Selfishness is exploiting others for your comfort. Self-respect is refusing to be exploited. They are not the same, and anyone who tells you otherwise is benefiting from your silence. The final shift arrived without ceremony, on an ordinary morning. When I realized my thoughts were no longer looping back to the past, I was sitting at my desk reviewing plans for a new project, when it struck me that my parents hadn't crossed my mind at all. Not in defiance, not in grief, not even in relief. They simply weren't present in my internal landscape anymore. And that absence felt profound. For a long time, even after everything settled, my identity had still been shaped by what I escaped. I wasn't shrinking anymore, but I was still oriented around the shadow of where I came from, around what I lost, around what I survived. That phase had been necessary, but it wasn't meant to be permanent. At some point, healing stops being about protection and starts being about creation. I didn't want my life defined by the family I walked away from. I wanted it defined by what I was building now. Once that intention clicked, my focus shifted forward in a way that felt physical. I stopped revisiting old wounds to see if they still hurt, stopped measuring my progress against who I used to be, stopped explaining myself to people who weren't invested in my future, my days filled with choices that felt aligned instead of reactive. I said yes to work that mattered and no to opportunities designed only to impress. I hired based on integrity instead of polish. I built systems that prioritize sustainability over spectacle, and the more I lived this way, the less my old life fit me. Not painfully, naturally, like outgrowing clothes you don't miss once they're gone. Marcus noticed the change before I named it myself. One night while we were cooking together, he said, I seemed lighter, not happier or louder, just lighter. When I asked what he meant, he smiled and said, I wasn't carrying ghosts anymore. He was right. I had stopped dragging old conversations into new rooms, stopped bracing for judgment that wasn't coming, stopped living as if my worth was a rebuttal to someone else's story. There was a moment that confirmed the shift completely. I was invited to speak at a small professional gathering. Nothing flashy, just people who cared about the work. Afterward, a woman approached me and said my projects felt calm, like they knew where they were going. She didn't mention my family, my past, or what I had survived. She spoke only about what I was creating now, that landed deeper than any validation I had chased, because it wasn't about endurance, it was about intention. In that moment, I understood my parents' greatest loss wasn't access to my success or my forgiveness. It was the chance to know the person I became once I stopped trying to earn love. And that loss wasn't mine to carry. I thought differently about legacy then, about what kind of environments I wanted to create, not just materially but emotionally. I knew any life I built from that point forward would not be powered by fear or conditional affection. Challenges still came, but they no longer felt like verdicts on my worth. They were problems to solve, not identities to confirm. Mistakes became information, not indictments. That internal safety was the real inheritance I had given myself. Something no one could threaten or reclaim. Old connections resurfaced from time to time. Opportunities arrived with strings attached. People tested whether proximity could still be leveraged. But my response was steady. I didn't react. I evaluated. I didn't explain. I decided. Clarity unsettles people who rely on confusion for control, but it attracts those who value honesty. My circle grew smaller and stronger, my work more focused, my life quieter in the best way. One afternoon, walking through a completed project, I watched someone sit down and rest in a space I had helped create, and I felt a quiet awe. This is what I build now. Not defenses, not arguments, but places where people can breathe. That was when I knew the story had truly changed. If you're listening to this and still living in reaction to what hurt you, understand this clearly. That phase passes. One day, without warning, you'll realize your life is no longer organized around what you escaped, but oriented toward what you're creating, and that's when freedom becomes real. The last lesson didn't arrive as closure or forgiveness, or some dramatic final conversation where everything made sense. It arrived the moment I realized I no longer needed my story to end a certain way in order for my life to feel complete. For years I believed healing meant being understood, that one day, if I explained myself clearly enough or proved my worth decisively enough, the people who hurt me would finally see what they had done. I thought peace lived on the other side of recognition. What I learned instead is that peace lives on the other side of release. Release of expectation. Release of the fantasy that the past will suddenly become fair. Release of the belief that love is something you earn by tolerating harm. That belief had shaped everything. It taught me to stay quiet when I should have spoken, to stay loyal when loyalty required self-erasure, to confuse endurance with virtue. Walking away from my family didn't break that belief immediately. It exposed it. And exposure was only the beginning. The real work came afterward, when no one was watching and there was no conflict left to distract me. I had to learn how to live without measuring myself against people who never intended to measure fairly. I had to accept that some people are not capable of loving you in ways that feel safe. No matter how patient or successful or forgiving you are, that understanding didn't make them villains, and it didn't make me superior. It simply made the boundaries necessary. Understanding someone's limitations does not require you to live inside them. Once that distinction settled, everything changed. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Stopped replaying conversations in my head hoping for different outcomes. Stopped negotiating with ghosts. Closure didn't come when my parents faced consequences or lost control. It came when their reactions stopped mattering to me, when their silence no longer felt loud, when their absence stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like space. I learned boundaries are not punishments, they are information. They show you who respects you without needing access, and who only values you when they can control you. Words never revealed that truth for me, boundaries did. The moment I stopped explaining and started choosing my life. Clarified, not because people finally understood me, but because I finally understood myself. Today, my life is not defined by the family I lost, but by the life I chose. By the calm I protect, by relationships that don't require shrinking, by work that feels aligned instead of compensatory, by peace that does not depend on anyone else's behavior. None of it is perfect. All of it is real. And real is something I never had growing up. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it is this. Love that requires you to disappear is not love. Family that demands silence in exchange for belonging is not family. Peace that only exists when you are small is not peace. You are allowed to outgrow the roles that once kept you safe, but now keep you trapped. You are allowed to choose yourself without waiting for permission from people who benefit from you staying the same. You are not selfish for refusing to carry what was never yours to hold. Sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes it is not revenge or reconciliation or public victory. Sometimes justice is building a life so grounded and self-directed that the people who tried to define you no longer get a vote. If this story felt familiar, if any part of it mirrored something you have lived through, let this be your line in the sand. Choose yourself without apology. Protect your peace without guilt. Build a life that does not require constant justification. And then, let it be enough. If you believe this was justice served, say justice in the comments. Subscribe for more stories where truth wins quietly. And stay with us, because the next story goes even deeper.